I wanted to be terrified, heart-racing, pooping my pants as I throw the popcorn whilst I'm running up the stairs away from a knife-wielding killer. Kinda scared. Did I get that? Hey, it's Jamie, thanks for stopping by, and today we're going through the journey of my experience of reading
the scariest book ever written,
or at least one of them. Now, when I was looking into what could be the scariest book ever written, I consulted Google, I looked at book lists, articles, all that kind of stuff. And Stephen King always seems to come out on top. He monopolizes the scary book realm. Sometimes Shirley Jackson's The Haunting of Hill House got a look in, sometimes The Exorcist by William Peter Blatty, but the top contenders were almost always Stephen King, and specifically The Shining, Pet Sematary, and It. After my deep internet consultation, I in the end settled on Pet Sematary. This mostly happened because I knew nothing about what Pet Sematary was about, and I read a lot of people describing it as the most disturbing / scary book that Stephen King has ever written, so I was like, there might be something in this. And then when it came to The Shining and It, I've watched the movies for both of those and I know the premise, and I just thought maybe there will be a bigger fear factor for me going in totally unknowing of what is about to hit me. Plus, Stephen King himself thinks that Pet Sematary is the most disturbing book he's ever written, and that he probably went too far with it. I have this very fetching hardcover folio edition of it, and it's just stunning. And my copy literally starts with an author's introduction from Stephen King, where he says, "When I'm asked, as I frequently am, what I consider to be the most frightening book I've ever written, the answer I give comes easily and with no hesitation: Pet Sematary. It may not be the one that scares readers the most based on the mail. I'd guess the one that does is probably The Shining, but the fear bone, like the funny bone, is located in different places on different people. All I know is that Pet Sematary is the one I put away in a drawer thinking I had finally gone too far." When the king of horror thinks he's written a book that's gone too far, it does set the expectation that it's going to be terrifying. So I was pretty well set up that Pet Sematary had this deep-rooted reputation of being pretty terrifying. So it seemed like a really good starting point to try and find the scariest book ever written. I was set up for thrills, chills, and being too scared to go to the bathroom without a nightlight. But before we get into Pet Sematary and how I found it and how I found the read and what it's about and everything, I wanted to cover what I actually find scary. Because, like Stephen King said, the funny bone is located differently, as is the fear bone on different people. Obviously, my feelings towards this book are very subjective to what I find scary. So typically what scares me the most are the things that can actually happen. It's meaningless horror, meaningless killing, things that make you jump. It's stuff that gets your heart racing and on the edge of your seat and you don't know where it's going to go, and that creates this like fear response. That's the type of stuff that I find
scary.
Also, for some really weird reason, because it goes very against everything else I find scary, aliens, they just freak me out. I saw a glimpse of Independence Day when I was a little bit too young. I had the worst nightmare of my entire life. I hid under the bed for the whole day because I thought aliens were going to come and kill me. So aliens and I guess like realistic things where really horrible things happen to people that is actually very possible to happen in real life. And there's jump scares and tension going on as well. Adds an extra layer of fear. So now we've spoken about me and what I find scary. What is Pet Sematary actually about? I'm going to give a very like top level overview. This is going to be mostly spoiler free or very, very spoiler light. I'm not going to give away the main things that happen. So if you've not read it and you are not wanting spoilers, you can carry on watching, and I will give a very specific warning later on when there may be a spoiler and you can skip that specific part. So I'm just going to give you a rundown of the general plot, the themes, the vibe, the tone of the book, and that kind of stuff that you read. Just as a reminder as well, I really knew nothing about Pet Sematary before reading it. I did not know even the general premise. I didn't know the vibes. I didn't know the tone. I didn't know the themes. Absolutely nothing before I read it. So Pet Sematary follows Lewis Creed and his family where they move from the city out to rural Maine for a quieter life. All sounds very lovely and idyllic, nothing scary going on. They move into a house that's right by a very busy road, and on their land is a small pet cemetery where the local kids bury their pets. Creepy, like I'd have wanted to know that before I bought the house, if I'm honest. And on the sign to the cemetery is spelt with an S because kids wrote it, and that was the one thing I knew about this book, is that cemetery was spelt wrong, and I'd always wondered why, so that really got that itch of curiosity for me. I know I could have googled it a long time ago, but it was kind of more fun just to find out when I happened to read this book one day. But now I've just told everybody. I feel like that is not a big deal. And then beyond the Pet Sematary, further on to Creed's land, is something darker, something older, something more mysterious, and the pathway to this darker, mysterious, older thing is blocked by, it's referred to as deadfall in the book, and I think it's basically a bunch of branches all stacked high, very precarious precarious, not the kind of thing you would want to climb over. And then when tragedy hits close to the Creed family, Lewis is tempted by something that has been the undoing of many others before him. Anakin Skywalker, anyone? Maybe that's a very light spoiler, I don't know. The rest of the book basically follows Lewis's spiral and how deep this temptation can go and how much it can unravel and impact people's lives. What I learned is that Pet Sematary is not the kind of horror book or scary book that's going to give you jump scares or a puzzle to solve. It's a slow burn psychological horror where the fear and the terror isn't from monsters, but it's from the loss of emotional control and control generally and just how far people can be pushed. The overall tone of the book is somber and muted and grim. Stephen King creates this deep sense of dread and like the wheels are already in motion right from the beginning of this book. And it explores themes of primarily grief and denial, but also death and mortality. It is dark. The ending is also pretty infamous in part because of what it represents, because it ends without offering any kind of hope or restoring of order or positivity. There's no light at the end of the tunnel. It just kind of ends how deep down you knew it was always going to end, but the whole time you've been hoping it wouldn't go that way. So what did I think of Pet Sematary? Okay, I can see that objectively it is a really well told story, as I would expect from Stephen King. The characters are well developed, there is a building tension, a building sense of dread, and he also had this ability to create existential dread, and it created a lot of unpleasant feelings. However, subjectively, it just didn't quite land for me. Even though bad things happen to a cat, and that is pretty damn terrifying, it clearly did not hit my fear bone hard enough. I did enjoy the read overall, but I think I went in with super high expectations of what this book was going to achieve and what it was going to make me feel. And in the end, I just found the slow burn way too slow for me, and the psychological horror not scary enough. It was more upsetting than scary, and that is where it fell a bit flat for me. I also accept that this is totally subjective to me. I think one thing that made the burn too slow was the pacing. It didn't keep me fully engaged, and I forgave it at first for being this very slow build, because then it did eventually get somewhere, but then as soon as it got somewhere, it just nosedived off a cliff again. It was so weird. It's like being on a roller coaster and reaching the top, and you think, oh yeah, we're gonna get somewhere, and then instead of like going down the big scary loop to see what's gonna happen next, you kind of teeter at the top and then you really slowly roll back down. And then it does like build you back up again, and eventually you go down. But I don't need the teasing at the top of the roller coaster, you know? I just want it to go over. The back and forth on the tension and the fear and the losing of that pacing for me took away the tension. It took away the dread. It just created a bit of annoyance because it was like the book was teasing me, but then the payoff wasn't worth the teasing. It was too predictable a payoff. It was like, I knew it was happening, so just make it happen. I'm getting fed up now. To not be entirely critical, I do think it was a really interesting premise and a decent read. There were moments of like human joy and deep human connection that made the horrible bits even more horrible. And there was a depth to the story that I really enjoyed. If it had been just that little bit faster paced, that little bit less predictable, I think I would have enjoyed it a lot more, and I would have found it a lot scarier and more disturbing. I think overall it was just incompatible with what I find scary. I wanted to be scared shitless with my heart racing, needing to turn the page to find out what happened next, needing to know the conclusion, but I just didn't. I found it very easy to put this book down at the end of the day. And I totally understand that it is meant to be this slower burn psychological horror that like eats away at you gradually, but it was just too gradual. Whatever was eating away at my fear took a nap halfway through, and I don't know where I'm going with that. The majority of the fear factor of the book and where that roller coaster goes down is about the last 100 pages of a 350 page book, which is just a bit too late for me. You've kind of lost me already at that point. And although it did get my heart racing a little bit and it felt very uncomfortable to read and it was disturbing and I was like, oh my god, what is going on here? This is a lot. I still didn't really struggle to put it down. And I didn't need a nightlight. If I read a scary book, I want to need a damn nightlight. I also didn't really think too much about the book after I finished it, which I think is a really big sign of how it resonated with you as an individual. There are some things that I will think about for weeks after I've read them, other things for a few days, but this one was just like, I finished it and I was like, okay, cool. It was always going to happen. We knew what was going to happen. It happened. Great. I can not read this book anymore and I can put it away. To this book's credit, I did get a sense of existential dread whilst reading it on occasion. I feel like it would be impossible to not feel that way to some extent whilst reading Pet Sematary. And it was more of the real life, what is actually possible events that I found scarier, and that matches up with what I do find scarier. But there was just a lot of foreshadowing and snippets of bits that revealed bits that were going to happen later, or the trajectory of certain storylines, and it didn't hit well with me in a horror book to have that happening because it just kept popping that balloon of suspense. For example, right at the beginning, Stephen King expresses that two characters are very close, you know, like a kind of father-son type bond. And then partway through, there's this moment where, as a reader, you could really well be questioning the motivations and the good versus bad of one of these characters during a certain section. But because you know that they're so close all the way through, it's like you're sat there going, okay, you're trying to like bait me into thinking this dude is bad, but I know he's not because you already told me he's not. I do have a confession. I did not find this book very scary. However, I did read this book before going to sleep for a few nights in a row. And after a couple of nights, I did start having some nightmares, specifically where a character from the book, it's quite early on in the book, appeared in my nightmares. And it was quite reminiscent of a scene from the book. And I did actually have an instance of sleep paralysis, which I'm laughing about, but I hate. It's very rare for me to have these. So my brain is telling me like it's not just a coincidence. It was awful. Oh my god. I can't say it was definitely the book, but it just happened so infrequently that it was just a really big coincidence that it happened to have themes that were tied to the book within it and happened whilst I was reading the book before going to sleep. So I am willing to admit that maybe Pet Sematary scared my subconscious more than my conscious. So I will give it an additional point on the fear factor for that basis. And I do totally get that there are some very horrifying moments in this book. Okay, I did personally just find more of those like horrifying moments just really sad. The book scared me less than it made me sad. For a comparison, after I finished the book, I watched the movie, the newer one. I think it's 2019. I do want to watch the older one as well, but the newer one was actually available. And I also didn't find the film scary. And the film actually changed a couple large elements, one in particular, that made it less scary than the book. I was like, why have you done this? This makes the storyline less disturbing. And there is another thing that is very, very obvious that's happening in the movie to do with the storyline. And I think it's true to the book version of the story because there were hints to it in the book, but it being more obvious in the movie and you being able to see less of what was coming next, the less foreshadowing, there were elements of the movie that were far creepier than the book. And maybe if those elements had translated in the book or been there, I personally would have found it scarier to read. To conclude, I did enjoy reading Pet Sematary. It wasn't one of those books that was a chore. It took me longer to read than typical, but it wasn't a slog. I wasn't like, oh my god, please let this book be done. It was just slower and way more predictable than I expected it to be. And I just wanted so much more from it, but I didn't feel like it was a waste of time reading it, and I still enjoyed the story, if you can say you can enjoy this kind of story. I also totally accept that the point of this book could be in the fact that it's a slow burn and it's that building sense of dread and it's supposed to be predictable and that is meant to make it more scary. But I think based on my personal criteria of what I find scary, the real life events were there. I need it to be unpredictable. I need it to shock me, to feel truly like scary. I feel like when things build up, my head just goes, oh no, it's not scary anymore. I know what's happening. Even though what's happening is a scary thing, I won't have the fear factor because I can see it coming. That's it. I need to not see things coming. I think that's a big thing. I can feel uncomfortable. I can feel sad about watching the inevitable building up until it eventually happens, even though you're willing it not to, but I won't feel scared. I am also fully open to accepting that maybe I expected too much from this book. I went into it expecting it to be scary, expecting it to live up to its reputation, that maybe for me I overhyped the scare so much that I didn't find it scary in the end. Maybe if I wasn't expecting the fear, I would have felt it more. I'm not sure. Maybe one day I'll just pick up a book and be absolutely terrified of it, and then I will come back and do a new version of this video and be like, oh my god, I found it. Now, I did find a review of Pet Sematary that really summed up how I feel about it very, very well. What I do want to point out is that it does include a spoiler. So if you do not want spoilers for this book, I do feel like it's quite old at this point, but still I want people to be able to come to these videos to see if they want to read the book. I don't want to tell you everything about the book. For those who don't mind a spoiler or who have read it before, this review, spoiler coming up in like 3, 2, 1, skip. Probably a spoiler, but are there people reading this book who have no idea what's coming? Hello, that was me. If it was old enough and popular enough and filmed enough, that I think it's fine to talk about it. The most terrifying part of this book, which I had been dreading whenever I thought of rereading it, is the death of a child. It's a moment that filled me with horror long before I had a child, long before I was no longer a child myself. The sheer sheer existential horror of that event was captured so clearly, I feel weight in my chest just writing about it now, almost a year after I reread this. The rest of it is fine, not particularly scary, but not scary either, at least if you're accustomed to reading horror. The nature of the source of the horror cements its particular brand in King's oeuvre, a vaguely understood, otherworldly, demonic type of entity filled with maleficence as its base nature bleeding into our world. There's a touch of Lovecraft in it, particularly in how even when the characters are aware of it, they're helpless to resist its draw. I feel like that review did a really good job of explaining how I felt about certain bits of it. Yes, if you are joining back to miss the spoilers, that they are over. I did also ask some of you to let me know if you've read Pet Sematary and what you thought, so I wanted to give a little read and see if we match up or if we're at complete odds. One of the very few Stephen King books I actually found disturbing and the only one that gave me nightmares. I will credit the book for giving me nightmares. For me, it was less horror but more of an exploration of what loss and grief can do to someone. I would agree with that. It's more sad than scary. It's a very good read though. I hear that. Terrifying. A lot. I struggle to get through it as it's kind of slow, but it's worth a read in my opinion. Yeah, I feel that one. I can see the two camps. I wonder if it really is to do with what you specifically find the scariest and what disturbs you the most. I feel like if it doesn't hit that fear factor for you, it's gonna feel slow. But if it does hit, then it's gonna hit. This is the book that upset my mum so badly that she quit Stephen King for life. Oh, it's the only book by him that I started but did not finish. Really interesting. Scary as I found it slightly scary, but not nearly his scariest, but definitely one of the more disturbing ones. I think adjectives that could be used depending on who you are. You know those big like pages with all the words and the different sizes depending on how much they're used? I feel like because Pet Sematary seems to be so divided, you'd have like slow, boring, disturbing, sad, terrifying, nightmares. That would be the general gist of it. And it just depends on whether you would fall into the slow, boring, more sad camp or the terrifying, nightmares, disturbing camp. So to answer the question, is this the scariest book ever written or is this the scariest book I've ever read? No, definitely not. But I can see why it would broadly be considered a book that was scary and why it could truly horrify some people if it hit their fear bone. And I am going to overuse that phrase going forward because I love it. Based on like my criteria, I've been trying to think of a book that I found scarier. And I'd probably go for Megan Lally, That's Not My Name. It's a very different vibe. It's YA as well. It's not a diss, it's just they're typically a bit tamer on the fear. But there was just something about it that really creeped me out. And I think it's because everything that happens in it can happen in real life. That's what scared me. And it also had this like sense of loss and dread and ugh. But I should try an Alien book, to be honest, see if that scares me. I am still on the hunt for the scariest book now. Maybe it is another Stephen King. Maybe it is The Haunting of Hill House or maybe The Exorcist. Who knows? I'm sure I'll be back soon with another scary book to talk about. But in the meantime, have you read Pet Sematary? If you have, let me know down in the comments below what you thought about it. Did you find it a snooze fest or did you find it a scare fest? Fear fest would have been better. Go let me know in the comments below and also let me know other books that you think I might find scary, ones that you found scary. I want to know all the terrifying books. For now, thanks for watching and I'll catch you in the next chapter. Bye!